Have you been wondering what it's like to travel through Canada on the Alaska Highway? Hi everybody, I'm your host Natalie, and welcome to another episode of my Far North Cabin. I do this show out of my cabin in South Central Alaska, where my partner Jason and I live 100% off the grid, about a half mile from the road system, and we've been slowly developing our homestead for the past 7 years. And on this show, I discuss all things Alaska and northern life, off-grid living, valuable self-sufficiency and homesteading skills, and I also share stories about all the things that have happened to us since moving to the last frontier. So with that, let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back, guys. Thanks for being here. While I'm recording this, it's now August here in Alaska, and the signs of summer's end are already sneaking up on us. The fireweed flowers have almost bloomed to the top, and we all know up here that pretty much officially calls it for summer. And sprigs of yellow leaves are appearing on all the birch trees, and nighttime is finally creeping back. And last night, I actually saw stars for the first time in 3 months. And it's funny, I've actually gotten questions from summer tourists that ask, when can they see the aurora, the northern lights, during the summer? And I don't know, I'm nice about it, but the facts are the midnight sun gives off too much light to be able to see the northern lights, at least until mid-late August. So, it's good to do your research before traveling anywhere new, that way you know these things in advance. And my first experience, actually, of the midnight sun was when Jason and I first arrived in a town called Dawson Creek in British Columbia, Canada, all those years ago when we were first moving up to Alaska. And it got me thinking about that trip up the Alaska Highway and how there's so many folks making that trek through Canada by road to get up here. Not everyone flies here. Plenty of people drive here, and it's quite the expedition. So I decided to share that story on today's episode. And if you're curious about the backstory of how we even got the call to go to Alaska in the first place, this is me poking you to check out episode 1, where I talk a bit about how all that happened to us. And before we start, I just want to say I am totally not an expert by any means on Alaska highway travel. So it's good to do your own independent research to prepare for such a trip. The last time I did it was 7 years ago, and I've not left the state by road since. So a lot's changed since then. But I've made sure to do my research here to make sure that any advice that I'm giving is still relevant today. And the road gets better quality every year anyway, and you can take it all year round. We drove it in June of 2016. And since I live and drive in a place with 6 months of winter, I can also give some tips for taking what's called the Alcan in winter. And I would urge anyone to look up documentaries about the actual construction of the highway. The Army Corps of Engineers who worked to build it, specifically the 93rd, 95th, and 97th Engineer General Service Regiments, who were intrinsic in the highway even being completed. And their story is really important to tell, so I urge you to look that up. It really helped me understand and appreciate just what went into this 2,000 plus stretch of road and why it is such a technical marvel, and a really important step in us coming to Alaska. Regardless, the story of the trip that we took back in 2016 is a good one to tell, so let's dive right in. So we were going to Alaska. That was life-changing in a lot of ways, and so we knew that we would need to do our research and prepare correctly, especially for this huge journey through Canada on the way to Alaska. So we spent a lot of time on YouTube, watching videos from other people who had done it and looking up tips. And my dad actually sent me a gift in the mail, which was an awesome book called The Traveler's Guide to Alaska Camping. It's by Mike and Terry Church. And it was great because they've driven the 4 different Trans-Canada routes, and they knew all the best stops, RV parks, boondocking spots, and restaurants, and had everything rated by price. And they listed all the amenities too, and explained all the different routes, not just through Canada, but then all the highways in Alaska in great detail. The last edition of that book was actually released in 2014, and there are a lot of good books like it that are more up to date, and I totally recommend getting one, because it'll tell you a lot more than this episode will. And we also had a book that's popular called The Milepost. And that had maps and lists of places to sightsee. But it's not as definitive as some other books that you might find. The Alaska Highway was actually constructed during World War II to connect the United States to Alaska across Canada. And it begins at the junction of all these other Trans-Canada highways, and they all converge in Dawson Creek, British Columbia. And that's the beginning. And then it can take you all the way to Delta Junction, Alaska, or Chicken, depending on how far north you want to go through the Yukon. So the first steps of preparation included getting passports, having IDs, studying the exchange rates, as well as understanding the conversion of kilometers and liters, getting an up-to-date rabies certification for our dog, because they do require that at the border if you're bringing animals through, and having declaration forms for firearms and other weapons. They do require that. One thing you can do is you can ship it to Alaska, but you kind of already have to have a P.O. box or a place for that to go. So that's something to think about if you're going to bring guns. Also, we had to prepare our vehicle and our trailer for the long journey. We had a truck, a dually Chevy, and a fifth wheel travel trailer. And so we had to get those ready. We also were bringing about 4 extra gas cans that we were going to keep full and secure to the back of our vehicle for any emergency fuel needs, as we read that there would be long stretches between service stations. And depending on the time of day or year, some may not be open. And we also planned to shop at grocery stores in Canada and try not to bring any food across the border. We didn't want any hiccups that would get us stopped. We also had a sufficient first aid kit in our vehicle, camping gear for all scenarios, a comprehensive emergency car kit to be able to fix any problems that might arise, and a good understanding of the traffic laws both in BC and in the Yukon. I mean, you're a guest in their country, so you gotta know the laws. And we planned our route. There are a few different routes that you can take to go up to Dawson Creek and then consequently through northern BC and the Yukon Territory. And also depending on where you're coming from in North America, that will dictate your route. One thing that can adversely affect the route that you plan to take is wildfires. And right now, there are some immense ones happening in Canada, and they are severely impacting the country. This might change some things. There was one that was happening in Alberta before we were about to travel, and it hit a key oil refinery, which came to affect the gas prices and gas availability. So these are important things that we found out by the time we got into Canada that I'm glad that we were prepared for. So after wrapping up all of our affairs in Oregon, we officially set out on June 7th, 2016. And after we left Portland and before hitting Canada, we had our first glitch. We were driving and we heard a loud bang on the interstate. And it turns out one of our trailer tires had blown out. And we hadn't planned a place to stay because we were going to cross the border that evening. So we'd call RV parks that were all full because there weren't any campgrounds near us, except for one in Mount Vernon. And the lady said, "Hurry on up, lip over here. We're down the street from Les Schwab." And we got the spot at the last minute. And we planned to get the tires replaced the next morning before crossing the border. And I'm so glad that we had enough budgeted. We were kind of doing this on credit and a little bit of scrimped savings and hope. So we had a good attitude about it. It's important to not get fatalistic, especially when the first thing goes wrong. Things will go wrong, but the more prepared you are to deal with them, and you don't panic, you'll be fine. So good tires were important for this road that we were going to face. So I'm actually kind of glad that it happened when it did. So the next day we went to Les Schwab and got our trailer tires fixed in the morning, replaced with good all-weather tires that could handle the Alaska Highway, which we also had on our truck. So we'd had a delay, but it was a good thing. It would have just ended up happening somewhere less convenient. It ended up working out. So the next day was technically day 1. So day 1, we had our tires. Everything was fixed. We're all ready to go. We're feeling confident now. So we set off for our designated border crossing, which was near Bellingham, Washington, because we read that that was a less popular crossing. And we'd heard that tip on YouTube that it was a good time and trouble saver. There weren't any hiccups. Border Patrol didn't ask too many questions. We had all the necessary paperwork. We were only a bit nervous, but she eventually sent us on our way, and we breathed this big sigh of relief we didn't have to get pulled over and searched, and we were excited to finally be in British Columbia. Everything was in kilometers and in liters, so I was using my phone a lot to do the conversions. But it was a little shocking how high the prices were for gas because of that oil refinery fire that I told you about before. It really ate into our budget more than we'd planned, but we tried our best to work around it. I have a rule in general that works on the Alaska Highway and anywhere basically. It's called the half a tank rule. And basically, when you're at half a tank, if you can go fill up, fill up. And that's just a good habit to have, especially when you're doing a long, long adventure like this one. So the first 800 miles of our route would actually start on the Trans-Canada Highway 1. And we really felt on our way once we started on this because we were seeing beautiful mountains and vast forests. And I gotta admit, I got a bit apprehensive through stretches of winding, twisting mountain roads next to sheer cliffs that would drop you right into a raging river if anything went wrong, and numerous signs for falling rocks and signs that rocks had indeed rolled down the cliffs probably 5 minutes before we got there. And it was a busy truck route as well, and the truck drivers, they're pros. They just cruise right past you, and you feel your vehicle wobble a little bit. So they've got schedules to keep. We respect that, but, use caution when you're driving by all these big freight trucks. We give them a lot of space. And speaking of rocks, there's also a great deal of construction that takes place along this whole highway during summer, because that's really the only time anybody can do any decent work on it. It's that way in Alaska, too. And we had numerous construction stops all the way through British Columbia, where we'd have to wait and park in a long line of cars and then follow what's called a pilot car on the opposite side of the road where they had opposing traffic stopped so that you can pass on the side that's not being actively worked on. And there are very strict laws about how to drive through construction zones in Canada, and the fines are pretty stiff if you don't do it. So, always do exactly what the road workers say, follow the signs. They're serious about the conditions, so don't risk it by trying anything. So, at one of these traffic stops, we were waiting our turn for the pilot car, and opposing traffic was going by us on the other side. They had just come through the construction zone. Suddenly, the construction workers were waving wildly at this oncoming truck, who was going a bit too fast downhill. We were parked uphill. And the workers had been spreading gravel, and there were loose rocks of all shapes and sizes all over the road. Slow motion, Jason and I lock eyes with this grapefruit-sized rock that gets picked up by the truck's left back tire as he approaches us. And this rock flew like a bullet straight at our windshield on my side. I shrieked and I ducked, and we heard this bang! Well, it didn't go through the windshield, thank God, and it didn't hit me, but it left a substantial crater in the bottom right corner of our windshield. And we were thankful we weren't hurt and our visibility wasn't impaired, but it scared the crap out of us, and come to find out later that a cracked windshield is a very common occurrence on this highway. It's almost a requirement because there's so much loose gravel around, and cars and trucks can eject it onto you, whether they're passing you or they're in front of you. And it can crack your windshield or even your headlights. So it's good to carry spare bulbs in case that happens. Like I said, luckily we could still see. It didn't hit me, and we calmed our racing hearts and carried on. And after all that, we were out of construction zones and into wide, vast forests, seeing lake after lake, river after river, and all these cute little towns that we could have easily settled in if it weren't for the strict citizenship requirements of Canada. I've never seen log craftsmanship like that before. It really impressed both of us. And after a while, it was getting to be about 11:30 at night. It had been a long day, and we wanted to stop for the night. And you can drive straight through the nights on the Alcan if you want to. And in summer, you'll have more light out during the night, the farther north you go. But in winter, it'll be much darker, earlier, and for longer. And driving at night in remote stretches of road can be unsafe if you're new to it. There's more wildlife activity and obstacles you may not be able to see, and including the road conditions. So if you get trapped, or you have a blowout or engine trouble or anything like that, there may not be anybody passing you for a while on the road, and you may not have cell service. So we kind of, even though it was summer, we chose to stop at night, rest, then carry on the next day. And you don't have to stay in an RV park or a campground. That's just what we preferred doing. We had budgeted out to do that. A lot of people do this thing called boondocking, which means you park and camp in a turnout or a campground sort of right off the side of the road. And this is definitely the economical thing to do because it's free. But you also have to look up if you're legally allowed to do that in the spot that you picked and do it safely. Be aware that there's vehicles passing by you, there's wildlife around you, there are people that can be sketchy and mess with you. So, you have to be safe, be prepared for that. It is a risk that you're taking, but it is free. So it goes without saying that you can camp along the Alaska Highway. When you're camping in the Canadian wilderness, it is important to observe safety and have good situational awareness and be prepared for wildlife encounters. Bear activity is pretty high, along with moose activity, and it's good to be able to protect yourself should something happen. Can of bear spray is always a good idea. And dispose of your trash by either packing it out and saving it till you get to a town and throwing it away, or if you're in the middle of the woods, there are a lot of bear-proof bins provided by the Canadian Provincial Park Service. Use those, they're pretty tough. So since we had a fifth-wheel trailer, we stayed at this sort of affordable RV park in a municipality that's called 100 Mile House. And it was nice to circle that on the map and go, wow, we've gone really far so far. We weren't even halfway there, but we were so exhausted after a long day. And it really did feel like an expedition. So we'd be on our way the next day to the official start point of the Alaska Highway, which is Dawson Creek. So we made a point to make an early start the next day. We really wanted to make it to Dawson Creek by midnight. Now, you can take your time on this highway, but some of that is a luxury that you can only afford if you can afford it, and we really couldn't. We had a very strict budget to keep, and the gas prices were really cutting into it, so we had to keep a pretty tight schedule. We were concerned about our windshield, but we resolved maybe we can get it fixed in Dawson Creek, so we were like, well, it's not spider webbing at this point, so we're just going to go for it. So our mileage was also kind of crappy too, because when you're towing a trailer or an RV behind you, it can really affect your mileage and slow you down. So, even though I was pretty sure we'd never need our 4 gas cans on the back, I was still happy they were there. It provided a sense of relief, like all of our other gear did. All I could think about when we were driving is how much I wanted to live in Canada. It was so gorgeous, so we were both all about it. And about mid-afternoon, we began our first pass through the Canadian Rockies, which we would end up going through twice on this journey. Before that stretch, we got some lunch at A&W, and oh my goodness, it was the best fast food I have ever had in my life. And I don't think it was biased just because I was excited to be in Canada. Like, the food is genuinely better there. Oh my gosh. People eat pretty well in Canada. So, also, if you ever need to get coffee, go to Tim Hortons. It's like the official coffee and donut stop of Canada, and so worth going to. And that is not a paid promotion. I enjoyed it. So once we got into the mountains, it was actually, first of all, it was pretty hot. And then all of a sudden there were a lot of clouds coming in. The weather changed on an absolute dime. And it rained a lot during our first pass through the Rockies. And we started seeing a lot of black bears. And I'd never really seen that many black bears, just on the side of the road doing bear stuff. So you go watch out, slow down. Whenever you see wildlife, slow down, to where it doesn't impede traffic behind you. And try not to get out of your vehicle and go, hi bear, try to leave them alone. And we pushed on well through the night, and the road was gorgeous. It's very kind of windy, twisting and turning through all these beautiful mountains, all these hills, and we just loved it. We were spellbound. And then we made it to Dawson Creek by midnight, and we pulled into the Northern Lights RV Park, which I found in my book by Mike and Terry Church. And it was nice to be able to plan out at least 2 or 3 potential campsites where I could call ahead and just go, hey, do you have a vacancy? And most of them I didn't even have to do that. There was a place to park, so that was really nice to know that we could set up shop. And the storm had finally broken over us by the time we got there, and it was the most amazing thing ever. Like, the midnight sun, we were just beginning to see that because we're now north enough to where, like, wow, it's really light out. What time is it? And the clouds were all orange and pink, and then this huge double rainbow went right over the RV park, and we were just like two little kids gaping up at the sky like, wow. So so that was our first night, and the next day we stayed an extra day in Dawson Creek to sightsee, obviously, and try to arrange to get our windshield fixed. There are things definitely worth visiting in Dawson Creek. Okay, it's the official start of the highway, so the mile zero post is where everyone goes to take a picture. And there are also cool things like they have a pioneer village. They have this huge art gallery that's in like a grain elevator that has a photo gallery of the construction of the highway, which is really cool if you're interested in the history of it. And the downtown area has lots of little shops that are worth checking out. We definitely did. And we also took that opportunity to get more of our money exchanged. So we could have loonies, so we could have some actual Canadian currency on hand, which is a good idea. Having cash and credit, that way you have a backup to your backup. So all in all, that first day where we weren't driving, we had a pretty nice day, kind of taking a break and just soaking up being in Canada and being in this historic place. But we also noticed that that storm hadn't really abated, and it looked to be brewing a lot bigger on the horizon. So the next morning, we got a call from the windshield place, and they said it'll be 3 more days till they could get us in. Well, we weren't really in a position to wait 3 more days to get this fixed. And we were also feeling something strange inside us, that we really ought to keep moving. And we couldn't really explain it, but the part I can rationalize is that we wanted to stay ahead of the weather. It's a good idea to keep up to date on the weather forecast regularly as you travel the Alaska Highway. As I said before, conditions change totally on a dime, and it's good to be ready for anything. There's a service called 511 that you can use to keep on top of things. And as I said before, a lot of times when you're driving, there is no cell or internet service. So checking these things every time you stop when you have a signal is a good idea. So heavy rain was on the way, and we needed to keep our schedule. And the gal at the RV park office actually sold us a sheet of windshield adhesive, which is a little clear square that we could put over the crater in our glass to keep it from spider webbing and getting worse. It seemed to work. And so we just decided to push on, scrap the whole getting it fixed, and keep going. And so we patched it up, packed up, and we set out on the official Alaska Highway. So before long, while we were on this first stretch of the official Alaska Highway, we drove past the remnants of a huge forest fire. The earth was black, and the trees were like little charred toothpicks, and that really stuck with me. Also, there were these little pink flowers coming up through all the black scorched earth, and I came to find out these were fireweed, aptly named because they are the first thing that usually springs up after a forest fire up here. Now, I knew the potential of wildfires would be something to be more prepared for in the future, and I thought about this a lot as we passed this, especially if we were going to be living in the woods. And unfortunately, wildfires are becoming more commonplace around the world. So that was a big thinker. And as the landscape gradually became more green, I started to notice a species of pine tree I'd never seen before, covering every inch of everything, and later learned these are called black spruce. They're kind of a stunted, tiny-looking pine tree. And they don't grow very tall. They grow less than a foot a year. And the root system is really shallow because of how cold it gets. So we were really starting to feel like we left the old world behind and the far north was getting closer and closer. So we headed up into the Rockies, the northern Rocky Mountains, for the second time. And after a while, we headed into this area called Pink Mountain Provincial Park. And up ahead, we spotted something that the Canada book said we might see. And I just thought it was one of those things that didn't happen to everybody. Like, oh, if you're lucky. Well, it was a herd of bison. And the only folks on the road were us and one camper van. So we were able to slow to a stop and watch them. And I'd never seen wild bison before. And our dog was so well behaved, totally quiet. Not like my dog now, who would have probably barked her head off, so we were lucky in that sense. They were much bigger than I thought. And they were hanging out all in the grass, eating. Two male bulls were locking horns. A mother cow had just given birth. Jason and I were so enthralled with this, and we took lots of pictures and video. And then once we passed this herd, we thought, wow, how cool was that? Well, because we thought that's all we were going to see. And then we head up around the bend, and then there's another herd of a couple hundred strong that crossed the road right in front of us. And there's a digital sign that said, "Caution, buffalo crossing." It's like they knew to cross there. And this time we saw babies, but you could feel the herd shaking the road as they crossed in front of us. Once they were all safely across, we continued on, and then we came across another herd of a few hundred, and the herd was slowly on the move north, kind of the same direction we were going. So we drove extra slow, didn't make any noise, not getting out of our vehicle, and they just walked right alongside us. Babies, males, cows. I could see their eyes, smell their breath, and hear the clip-clops of their hooves on the road. And this was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen ever, short of seeing a gray whale in the ocean in Oregon. Like, this was quite an amazing wildlife experience for me. And I'm so glad it happened, and it could happen to you. And it's a good general rule to never directly approach wildlife. Now, a lot of people get out of their cars and try to get real close. You see this all over social media and YouTube. You shouldn't get close up because people have been gored by bison easily. They're a very well-equipped animal. Well-armored assault cows. And especially when they have babies, they're going to be very, very protective. And basically, if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Give them plenty of space and don't get close behind them if they have to walk on the road in front of you. All will be well, and you'll get to enjoy this marvel of the Alaska Highway. In winter, I don't know how many of them will still hang around, but in summer, it's almost a guarantee. So after a few miles of being right alongside these amazing animals, we got to the bridge to cross our next river, and then they were all in our rearview mirror. But that was definitely one of the most magical parts of the trip. One of the things we noticed is that the road just kept getting more beautiful the further we went, especially in the Rockies. We saw at least 11 more black bears and began to notice that we were the only vehicle on the road for long stretches at a time. And I'll toss in this important reminder: you should have your headlights on at all times in Canada, day and night. There's a stretch near what's called the Toad River, and it runs right alongside the highway, practically flush with the road. So if you swerved off the road, you'd dump into the river beside you. So this was a really pretty stretch of road, but it's a good reminder to not be a daredevil when you do this drive. Take your time, especially if you're towing something heavy behind you. Let the fast ones who do this highway all the time just whiz around you and just take it slow. So, if the buffalo wasn't enough for one day, we eventually came over this rise and saw the most gorgeous lake that either one of us had ever seen in our lives. It was so blue, powder blue, something I'd never seen before. Flanked by the Terminal Mountain Range on the west side near the northern limit of the Rockies, this long blue lake just stretched out miles ahead of us. And of course, we had to stop and check it out. It was just us and the lake, and no one else was around. This is called Muncho Lake, and it's one of the most amazing lakes in Canada. And of course, we stuck our heads in it till we couldn't stand the cold and hung out on the sandbar for a while just to take it all in. I had to convince Jason not to go swimming in it. I didn't want to have to build a fire in case he got hypothermia, even though he's pretty tough with the cold. Lakes and rivers are bloody cold up here. And seriously, it was another moment that we were just in absolute awe of nature. The lake actually glows blue due to copper oxides that leach from the bedrock, and that's common in Alaska too. Anywhere that glaciers are common, shorter wavelengths of light glow blue. So when you ever see something like this, make sure you take pictures because no one believes you if they've never seen it before. Also, if you make sure to get a non-resident fishing license before you enter Canada, you can go fishing all throughout your journey. We hadn't done that. Our schedule was really pressing on us, so we didn't have long to stop and hang out here, but I'm really glad we did. It was beautiful. So, before we left the Rocky Mountains, we had one more wildlife encounter. Our dog needed to go to the bathroom. So we pulled over at the spot by a riverbank, and I took her on the leash and took her out to go potty. And then Jason hopped out of the truck and said, "Hey, I gotta go too." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll go wait in the truck. You take her." And handed the leash off to Jason, and I went and sat in the truck. So Jason was, doing his business, standing there. And all of a sudden, my dog's ears went up. Suddenly, Jason heard what our dog was noticing. He looked over at these bushes that were right near the riverbank and saw two blackish-brown ears rising up out of the bush. Then a head, then a body. It was a female black bear, and she was standing up, not in a threat display, but almost out of curiosity, like, "What are you?" And Jason calmly tightened the leash on the dog and said, "Come here, girl, let's go." And quietly walked slowly to the truck, got in the truck, and once he was in and the dog was in, we pulled gently away from the bank, and that was that. And then Jason said, "Yeah, I saw a bear." And I'm like, "What?" This is a very common occurrence. There are a lot of bears on this highway. We didn't see any grizzlies, but that does not mean that they are not there. So whenever you have to pull over for any reason, always be alert. So we'd had such a packed day, and once we got through the mountains, we finally made it to the Yukon border. And we arrived at our next campground, which is at Watson Lake. And it's right beside a little forest with 100,000 signs tacked onto signposts. It's called the Signpost Forest. So it was kind of this cute little magical, whimsical place to be camping nearby. We'd check it out the next day. So far, we were very satisfied, but we were dead tired. The next day, we'd push on through the Yukon territory for the Alaska border. So before we left the next day, we checked out the Signpost Forest, and we learned that it started in 1942 when a homesick American soldier put up a sign for his hometown while repairing and repainting directional posts. And ever since then, it caught on, and the forest has just exponentially grown, and there are signs from all over the world that people have put up. So bring one if you do the Alaska Highway. They'd actually provide a hammer and nails to put your own sign up, and it's cool to read all the different ones. You feel how many people have come through this area from all walks of life, all over the world. Unfortunately, I didn't know we could bring a sign. So we didn't leave one, but it was really cool to visit it and absorb how funky and historic it was. So finally we were on our way through the Yukon, which seemed very different from British Columbia. A larger part of it is like subarctic plateau, interspersed by mountains, river valleys, and ice fields. And ice fields are interconnected valley glaciers around mountain masses. And it was just so vast. You really, really felt small in this country. Once we were past Whitehorse, which is the capital of the Yukon and definitely worth stopping at, the road suddenly became not as good. There were more long stretches of gravel with no pavement that felt like driving on a washboard surface. A great deal of long bumps in the road, too. And these are called ice heaves, or frost heaves, and it's caused by formations of ice in the soil in winter, which push the road surface upward. In the Yukon, we didn't see as many active road crews as we did in BC. It was mostly signs that said, "Road construction, coming soon," and the recommended speed limit, and that was it. And I was like, good luck. So a lot of this has been changed since I was there. There's a lot more pavement and not so much gravel, but depending on what needs to be worked on, there could be some, so be prepared for this. And if you drive the Alaska Highway in winter, the road has been graded by the snowplows, and all those potholes and all those bumps all get filled up by snow, so it's smooth. Now, you obviously got to be careful of black ice and slippery patches and blowing snow, and there's a lot more hazards to deal with in the winter, but the road surface will be nice and smooth. It was up here that I saw my first moose ever. Jason had seen them in New England, but I'd never seen a moose in my life. And it ran across the road suddenly with a calf. And we had to go, whoa, slow down. And they lumbered across the road in front of us with their tongues hanging out. They might have been running from something. It was also hot. But wow, I couldn't believe how big they were. This is a good time to talk about another road habit that you should start learning in Canada and keep going through Alaska. Learn to dart your eyes from the left to the right and check for wildlife, because they can cross the road without warning. And this is even more true if you're driving in the dark. So really be careful. A moose can easily total a car or a truck, and it can be incredibly catastrophic and even deadly to both you and the moose. So habits you learn in Canada, keep those habits in Alaska. The moose were so cute, though. It was so great to see them. And we were coming up on the final stretch through the Yukon that was going to lead us to the Alaskan border in the route that we were taking, through an area called Destruction Bay and Burwash Landing. After another fill-up, because the next one was a long ways off, we finally reached this incredible spot in the road. Ahead was this range of gorgeous snow-capped mountains with the sun streaming out from the clouds above it like the gates of freaking paradise. And the road ahead was a visible fork, one south, one north. The south route takes you to Haines, which is one of the only road-accessible towns in southeast Alaska, from Canada. The northern route takes you to the eastern border. We were going north, so we took a right. To our left the whole way of this stretch was the incredible Kluan Range, which is this chain of mountains averaging 2,500 meters in height, and they just stretch out hundreds of miles into the distance. Lake after lake, unending forest, and these huge storm clouds brewing up ahead that were tinged purple by this late evening light. We were absolutely spellbound during this part of the trip. And we sat for a long time, not a word between us, just soaking up the majesty of this place. So after a few more hours, we realized that the mile markers on the road were not really accurate. So we were keeping track with our odometer and our paper maps. This is something to know, that a lot of those markers are known as historical mileposts. So you have to keep track of how far you've actually gone. And I was glad we had the actual maps of Canada, because I was getting no signal and zero internet out there. It was pretty deserted. Just us. Nobody ahead of us, nobody behind us. And we really felt on our own. The road started to get a little worse, then bad, and then just pure bulky gravel with rocks the size of grapefruits off and on for many miles. You're also going to feel the road harder if you've overloaded your vehicle or your towing vehicle. We were just a little bit over because we were literally moving everything we had in the world behind us in this little fifth-wheel trailer. And on one particularly rough patch of road, we suddenly felt a weird jolt and a loud noise behind us. So when we could pull over, we did, and Jason checked it out. The tires were fine, nothing had fallen off the back. But later we would come to find out that our leaf springs, which are a part of the suspension on the trailer, had just snapped. This ended up not being an issue until later on. Luckily, they hung on long enough for us to make it to our final campsite in south central Alaska. But damage to your tires or even the suspension of your vehicle is higher the heavier you are and the faster you take this road. It was getting close to midnight, and we were only 50 miles away from the Alaska border, so we were pushing it a little bit. We'd been driving for 16 straight hours. Lucky for us, the midnight sun was lighting the way, but we were so tired and we were dying to stop, but we really wanted to push on. Suddenly, that huge rainstorm I mentioned had been brewing over us for the last few hours. It finally let go, all at once, without warning, and it was like driving through a car wash. Our visibility was completely gone, and it looked like the road was flooding in front of us. We couldn't see. It didn't feel safe to stop in case the road washed out because we were on gravel. So we kept going, but we slowed our speed a little bit. We just didn't stop. And then the storm stopped as quickly as it had arrived. And we finally saw a turnout in the distance. We pulled over to slow our hearts down. And oh my goodness, this highway truly was beginning to feel like the boss level in a video game. We were white-knuckling it through most of this part. While it's not the most dangerous road on Earth, it's definitely not to be taken lightly, and we were driving in summer. In the winter, you need to take different preparations than summer, such as snow tires and winter survival kits in your vehicle should you have a breakdown and then maybe be caught in an inclement snowstorm. In winter, we would have taken different preparations, such as having snow tires, like with studs, winter survival kits in our vehicle should we have had a breakdown. You'll need to be able to keep warm and survive temperatures that can drop to below -45 Fahrenheit. An engine block heater would have been crucial, along with ropes, snow shovel, and lots of warm clothing. At least in the winter, like I said, the surface is better and the plow crews get out there pretty regularly. But instead of rain, which is the least of our problems in midsummer, you must be aware of blowing snow, fog, drifting snow on the highway, black ice, and bad visibility. So once we made it through the downpour, the gravel road patches, the broken suspensions that we would find out about later, we came up a hill and around a bend and saw a big wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Alaska, Historic Alaska Highway, Gateway to the 49th State," and oh my goodness, we made it. When Jason and I finally got to the official border crossing into Alaska, which was actually open 24 hours, the border guard tried to throw some curveballs at us to make sure that we weren't sketchy. And we were so tired, we were hoping that we were answering everything correctly. But we ended up passing with flying colors. So, after a brief stay at this place called the Old Border City Lodge, which it's not really a city, it's just an RV park, we stayed there for the night and got some rest. The next morning, we'd be heading to our next destination, another 90 miles to a town called Tok, T-O-K, where we would settle for another night to get ready for our journey down south to the Matanuska-Susitna Valley of Alaska. And that's the place that we had previously staked out where our campground was going to be. That's our base camp to begin our search for a new home in the last frontier. I was and still am so grateful for everything we learned on the Alaska Highway. And when we got to our campground finally in Houston, Alaska, the dusty, thick silt from the highway was just coated all over our truck and all over our trailer. And I looked at it like victory dust, and I wrote, "We survived the Alaska Highway" with my finger on the door because I was just so proud of us. I'm thankful that we made it. I'm thankful that we prepared correctly and that we were in a mindset of being ready for anything and taking one day at a time. And we really, really enjoyed our trip. It was definitely one of the most memorable trips of Jason's life and of my life. So, wow, what a long story. And that is definitely the edited version. There are a lot of other things that happened, but these were the most incredible and important things. So, a sad part of the story is that on June 16th, 2016, just 9 days after we'd left Dawson Creek, that storm system that I told you about early in the episode that we were concerned about actually dumped about 4 inches of rain all in one day. This caused devastating and severe flooding in the town, and it ruined businesses, it destroyed homes, and it actually seriously impacted access to the Alaska Highway from any northbound traffic. Now, we learned about this in Houston, Alaska, and we were absolutely shattered when we heard. Because, we were just there only over a week before, and we had had a bad feeling about that rain. And of course, we felt awful for everybody there that was affected by it. And just last July, a broken beaver dam caused a major washout on the highway in another area that shut it down for like 3 days until a detour was managed to be built. So that just adds more to the point that you should always pay attention to the weather and any alerts that you get and take them seriously. So in this episode, we talked about important tips for driving this highway, which included legalities and road rules like making sure your passport, your ID, your rabies shot certification for animals, declarations for firearms and weapons are all up to date. And since October 1st, 2022, there are no longer border entry restrictions related to COVID-19, but you might want to stay updated on that. It may be subject to change. We also talked about planning and prep, like having extra gas cans, making sure your vehicle is ship-shape with all-weather tires, and if you're traveling in winter, be prepared for Arctic survival and road conditions, and have the right tires for winter. Also having Canadian currency, paper maps, as well as GPS, and good Alaska Highway book, having the right clothing and a good first aid kit and all the tools you need to be able to fix anything that might go wrong. We also talked about knowing your routes and being ready to change them at a moment's notice, and how to check for the road condition updates. And that it's important to be ready for multiple construction zones and all the fun things that can happen there, and inclement weather. Also, we talked about planning to slow down and stop, not just for services and construction zones, but wild animals, beautiful, beautiful lakes and mountains and rivers, and there are a lot of places to stop that I didn't mention, and I have a lot of links in the show notes of places that are totally worth stopping at along some of the different routes of the Alaska Highway. And at last, we talked about staying ahead of the weather, keeping good situational awareness, and being fully prepared for your journey. So I really want to thank you all for joining me again for another episode of this podcast. I really appreciate your support and so excited that everybody is enjoying this program. I have some new episodes in the works about off-grid survival skills and winter preparation, because that's coming up for me. I'd like to also send out a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Your support keeps this show going, and it means so much to me. So thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep building that homesteading mindset and stay wild.